The gunshot echoed through the rugged Montana mountains, sending a flock of startled ravens into the crimson sunset sky. Hunter Lockhart didn't flinch as the bullet whistled past his ear, embedding itself in the ancient pine behind him. He'd been riding for 3 days straight, tracking the Blackwell gang across the unforgiving terrain, and this wasn't the first time someone had tried to put a hole in his head. It was 1878, and the West was still wild, especially in the remote stretches beyond Willow Creek. Hunter had been the sheriff of San Andreas, Montana, for nearly 5 years, but this pursuit had taken him far from the small mining town he'd sworn to protect. The Blackwell gang had robbed the San Andreas bank, killed 2 men, and taken a hostage reasons enough to push himself and his horse beyond exhaustion. "You're a stubborn fool, Lockhart," he muttered to himself, reaching for his canteen only to find it bone dry. His chestnut stallion, Thunder, snorted in agreement, foam flecking the animal's mouth despite the cool autumn air. Hunter dismounted stiffly, his tall frame aching from days in the saddle. At 32, he was still in his prime, broad-shouldered and strong from years of hard work, but even he had limits. His dark hair hung limply beneath his Stetson, and his normally clean-shaven face was covered in several days' worth of stubble. "Just a little farther, boy," he assured Thunder, patting the horse's sweat-slicked neck. "We'll find water soon." The horse gave him a reproachful look with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to say, "You've been promising that for hours." Hunter chuckled despite his exhaustion. "Don't you start on me too." As dusk settled fully over the mountains, Hunter reluctantly made camp in a small clearing. He had pushed on through nightfall for the past 2 nights, but even he recognized that both he and Thunder needed rest. The outlaw trail was growing cold anyway. They had likely split up after crossing the river yesterday. Sleep refused to come as Hunter lay on his bedroll, staring up at the star-filled sky. His body begged for rest, but his mind raced. Those bank robbers had killed Samuel Peterson, his deputy and friend of 15 years. The second victim had been young Timothy Walsh, barely 18 and working his first day at the bank. And then there was the hostage Nora Reed, the new schoolteacher who had arrived in San Andreas just 3 weeks prior. Hunter had only spoken to Miss Reed twice, once to welcome her to town, and again when he'd caught some rowdy miners harassing her outside the mercantile. He remembered her quiet dignity, her intelligent green eyes, and the gentle but firm way she'd handled the situation before he'd even stepped in. The thought of her in the hands of men like the Blackwell gang made his blood boil. Dawn broke, finding Hunter already in the saddle. Thunder protested with a snort and headshake, but moved forward obediently. The horse's ribs were starting to show beneath his once glossy coat. Hunter knew he was pushing the animal too hard, but the image of Miss Reed's face kept him moving forward. By midday, they had descended into a lush valley. The sound of running water drew them to a clear stream where Hunter finally allowed Thunder to rest while drinking his fill. He refilled his canteen and splashed water on his face, the cold shock momentarily reviving him. It was then that he noticed the smoke rising above the trees half a mile downstream. Cautiously, Hunter led Thunder through the dense underbrush, his hand never far from his Colt revolver. As he drew closer, he could make out a small cabin nestled against the hillside, its stone chimney sending wisps of smoke into the clear blue sky. Tethering Thunder to a tree, Hunter approached on foot, moving silently through the trees as he'd learned to do from an old Crow scout years ago. The cabin appeared well-maintained but isolated, at least 10 miles from the nearest settlement. A small vegetable garden and chicken coop suggested permanent residence. He was about to step into the clearing when the cabin door swung open. Hunter froze, his hand on his pistol grip, then slowly relaxed as a woman emerged carrying a basket of laundry. She was not one of the Blackwell gang, nor was she Miss Reed. This woman was older, perhaps in her 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair. She hummed softly as she hung shirts and linens on a rope strung between two pines. Hunter stepped back, intending to retreat unnoticed, when a twig snapped beneath his boot. The woman spun around, dropping her basket and reaching for a shotgun propped against the cabin wall with surprising speed. "Show yourself," she called, her voice steady as she aimed into the trees where Hunter stood. "Madam, I mean no harm," Hunter said, stepping slowly into the clearing with his empty hands raised. "I'm Sheriff Hunter Lockhart from San Andreas. I'm tracking some outlaws who robbed our bank and took a hostage." The woman kept the shotgun leveled at his chest, her eyes narrowing. "You're a long way from San Andreas, Sheriff." "Yes, madam. Been tracking them for 3 days now." The woman studied him for a long moment, taking in his haggard appearance, the dark circles beneath his bloodshot blue eyes, and the way he swayed slightly on his feet even while standing still. "You look like death warmed over," she finally said, lowering her weapon slightly. "When's the last time you slept proper?" Hunter managed a tired smile. "Define proper, madam." She shook her head disapprovingly. "My name's Martha Wilson, not madam, and I'd bet my best hen you haven't slept more than a few hours since you started this chase." She propped the shotgun back against the wall. "You said they took a hostage." "Yes, our new schoolteacher, Miss Nora Reed." Martha's expression softened. "Well, that changes things. I'd offer you my husband's help, but he's away trading furs in Bozeman. Won't be back for another week." She gestured toward the cabin. "But I can offer you a hot meal and a place to rest before you kill yourself from exhaustion." "Thank you, but I need to keep moving," Hunter replied, even as his body screamed for rest. "I've lost too much time already." Martha crossed her arms. "Sheriff, I've lived in these mountains for 20 years. I know every pass, trail, and hideout within 50 miles. If your outlaws are headed where I think they are, you're going to need your wits about you when you catch up." Hunter hesitated, his sense of duty warring with practicality. "Besides," Martha continued, "your horse looks ready to drop. You'll both be useless to that schoolteacher if you run yourselves into the ground." Hunter glanced back at Thunder, whose head hung low despite having drunk his fill at the stream. The horse had given his all without complaint. Martha was right, they both needed rest. "A few hours," he conceded reluctantly. "And if you could spare some feed for my horse." "Fetch him and bring him to the barn," Martha said, already turning toward the cabin. "I'll have stew ready by the time you're done seeing to him." Thunder perked up at the sight of the small barn and within minutes was contentedly munching on oats in a clean stall. Hunter removed the saddle and bridle, giving the horse a thorough rub-down before filling his water trough. "Rest up, partner," Hunter murmured, patting Thunder's neck. "We've still got a long ride ahead." The cabin was warm and smelled of savory stew and fresh baked bread when Hunter entered. His stomach growled loudly, reminding him that he'd been subsisting on jerky and hardtack for days. "Wash up," Martha instructed, pointing to a basin of water. "You're not sitting at my table in that state." Hunter complied, scrubbing the trail dust from his face and hands. When he sat down at the rough-hewn table, Martha placed a steaming bowl of venison stew before him, along with a thick slice of bread and a mug of strong coffee. "Thank you," he said sincerely, resisting the urge to wolf down the food. "This is very kind." Martha waved away his thanks, just doing what anyone would do. She sat across from him with her own bowl. "Now tell me about these outlaws and your schoolteacher." Between bites, Hunter explained about the Blackwell gang, 4 men who had been terrorizing banks and stage coaches across 3 territories. He described the robbery, how they'd killed Samuel and young Timothy, and taken Miss Reed when she happened to be making a deposit for school supplies. "And you've been chasing them alone?" Martha asked incredulously. Hunter nodded. "Had to. The other deputies laid up with a broken leg, and I couldn't wait to form a posse." He pushed his empty bowl away, feeling the warm food settling in his stomach. "The longer they have Miss Reed." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Martha studied him thoughtfully. "You care for this schoolteacher." "She's an innocent citizen of my town," Hunter replied stiffly. "It's my duty to bring her back safely." Martha murmured, unconvinced. "Well, Sheriff Lockhart, you won't be bringing anyone back safely if you collapse from exhaustion. There's a bed in the back room. I suggest you use it for a few hours." Hunter started to protest, but a massive yawn betrayed him. "4 hours," Martha said firmly. "Then I'll wake you and tell you exactly where the Blackwell gang is likely headed." Hunter's eyebrows shot up. "You know where they might be going?" Martha nodded. "There's an old mining camp in the high country, abandoned years ago when the silver ran out. It's remote, defensible, with good visibility of the approaches. Perfect hideout for men on the run." She stood, gathering their dishes. "Now go sleep before you fall face first into my table." The small bedroom was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a patchwork quilt. Hunter removed his gun belt and boots, then stretched out on the bed, intending only to rest his eyes for a moment before continuing his planning. He was asleep before his head fully settled into the pillow. Dreams of gunfire and Miss Reed's frightened face plagued Hunter's sleep, but his exhaustion was so complete that even these couldn't fully wake him. When Martha finally shook his shoulder, the shadows in the room had lengthened considerably. 4 hours, as promised," she said, setting a fresh cup of coffee on the small bedside table. "Though you could use 4 days by the look of you." Hunter sat up groggily, his body simultaneously thanking him for the rest and protesting the movement. "Thunder." "Fed, watered, and looking much better," Martha assured him. "I've packed you some provisions and filled your canteen." Hunter swung his feet to the floor and reached for the coffee. "Thank you. I'm in your debt." "No debt," Martha said. "Just bring that schoolteacher home safe." After splashing cold water on his face and putting on his boots, Hunter joined Martha at the table where she had spread out a rough map drawn on a piece of parchment. "We're here," she said, pointing to a spot near the stream. "The old mining camp is here, about 15 miles northwest, high up in these cliffs. There's really only one good approach along this old wagon trail." Her finger traced a winding path. "But there's another way, a game trail that comes in from behind the camp. It's treacherous, especially on horseback, but it would allow you to come in without being seen." Hunter studied the map, memorizing the landmarks Martha pointed out. "How do you know they're headed there?" "I don't know for certain," she admitted. "But 2 days ago, my husband's friend Jacob rode through on his way to Bozeman. Said he'd seen 4 men and a woman heading that direction. The woman looked like she was riding under duress. I didn't think much of it until you mentioned the Blackwell gang." Hunter's pulse quickened. "That has to be them. Did Jacob say if Miss Reed appeared unharmed?" "He said she seemed tired but not injured," Martha replied. "Said one of the men seemed to be protecting her from the others, keeping her close to him." Hunter frowned. That didn't sound like the Blackwell brothers he'd heard about. "Likely the youngest one," Martha suggested, reading his expression. "Jacob said one man was barely more than a boy, looking uncomfortable with the whole situation." That would be Danny Blackwell, Hunter realized. Barely 20 and new to his brother's outlaw ways, according to the wanted posters. Maybe the boy still had a conscience. "I'd better get moving," Hunter said, standing up and buckling on his gun belt. "I appreciate all your help, Martha." Martha nodded, rolling up the map and handing it to him. Take this. The landmarks are clear enough." She walked to a trunk in the corner and withdrew a Winchester rifle. "And take this too. It was my son's before he moved to California. Sounds like you might need more firepower than just that Colt." Hunter accepted the rifle, checking its action and finding it well maintained. "I'll return it when this is over." "See that you do," Martha said gruffly, "and bring yourself back in one piece too." Thunder was indeed looking better after his rest and feed, greeting Hunter with a soft nickering. The horse stood patiently as Hunter saddled him and secured the Winchester in its scabbard. "We've got a heading now, boy," Hunter told the horse as he mounted up. "And Miss Reed is still alive." Martha stood in the yard, watching as Hunter prepared to leave. "Follow the stream north for about 3 miles, then look for a lightning-struck pine that marks the trail west. The moon will be full tonight, so you'll have light if you need to ride after dark." Hunter tipped his hat to her. "I won't forget your kindness, Martha Wilson." "Just doing what's right," she replied. "Godspeed, Sheriff." The afternoon sun was already slanting toward the western mountains as Hunter rode away from the cabin. He kept Thunder to a steady trot, not wanting to exhaust the horse again but keenly aware of every passing minute. The 4 hours of sleep had cleared his mind and renewed his determination. But he knew that confronting 4 armed outlaws alone would require more than just determination. He followed Martha's directions, finding the lightning-struck pine and turning west onto a narrow trail that wound steadily upward into the mountains. Thunder handled the increasingly rocky terrain with sure-footed confidence, but Hunter could feel the horse tense as the trail narrowed beside steep drop-offs. As twilight descended, Hunter began looking for a place to make camp. Martha's map indicated a small plateau ahead that would serve as the last good resting place before the final approach to the mining camp. He found it just as the first stars appeared, a flat area sheltered by a rocky overhang, with sparse grass for Thunder and enough space to lay out a bedroll. Hunter made a cold camp, not wanting to risk a fire that might be spotted from above. He ate some of Martha's provisions, dried venison, hard cheese, and journey bread, and allowed himself only a few sips from his canteen. The night air grew chilly as the elevation increased, but he didn't mind. The cold kept him alert as he studied Martha's map by moonlight, planning his approach. According to the map, he was now about 5 miles from the abandoned mining camp. The main trail would take him straight to it, but as Martha had warned, it was the obvious approach and would surely be watched. The game trail she had mentioned branched off about a mile ahead, circling around and approaching the camp from the more rugged north side. Hunter checked his weapons, the Colt revolver that had been with him for 12 years, the Winchester that Martha had provided, and the hunting knife in his boot. He had ammunition for both firearms, but not enough for a prolonged gun battle. Stealth would be his best ally. He slept lightly, waking at the slightest sound, his hand never far from his revolver. When the eastern sky began to lighten, he was already up and preparing Thunder for the day's ride. The horse seemed to sense the importance of their mission, standing perfectly still as Hunter tightened the cinch. "Today we bring Miss Reed home," Hunter murmured, patting Thunder's neck, "and make the Blackwells pay for Samuel and Timothy." The game trail was exactly where Martha had indicated, nearly invisible unless one knew where to look. Hunter dismounted, leading Thunder carefully along the narrow path that clung to the mountainside. In places, it was barely wide enough for the horse, with a sheer drop of hundreds of feet on one side. Thunder snorted nervously but followed Hunter's lead, placing each hoof with deliberate care. By mid-morning, they had circled around behind the mining camp. Hunter tethered Thunder in a small copse of pines where the horse would have shade and a small patch of grass, then proceeded on foot. The last half-mile was a treacherous scramble over loose shale and between jagged rock formations, but it placed Hunter on a ridge overlooking the abandoned camp. Lying flat on his stomach, Hunter surveyed the scene below. The mining camp consisted of a main building, likely once the assay office and company store, 3 smaller cabins, and the collapsed entrance to the mine itself. A small corral held 5 horses, confirming that all 4 Blackwell brothers and Miss Reed were indeed there. Hunter focused his attention on the buildings, watching for movement. After several minutes, a man emerged from the main building, tall and broad-shouldered, with a shock of red hair visible beneath his hat. Frank Blackwell, the oldest brother and leader of the gang. He stretched, lit a cigarette, and strolled toward the corral to check on the horses. A few minutes later, another man appeared, shorter, with a distinctive limp. That would be Lyle Blackwell, the second brother, known for his vicious temper. He called something to Frank, who nodded and pointed toward the smallest cabin. Hunter shifted his position slightly, trying to see into the windows of the buildings. Where were they keeping Miss Reed? And where were the other 2 brothers? His question was partially answered when the door of the smallest cabin opened, and a young man stepped out, rifle in hand. Even from a distance, Hunter could tell this was Danny Blackwell, the youngest brother. The boy paced in front of the cabin door, his posture suggesting he was standing guard. Hunter's heart quickened. If Danny was guarding that cabin, Miss Reed was likely inside. But why post a guard if she was securely tied up? Unless they feared one of their own might harm her. The pieces were falling into place. Martha had said one man seemed to be protecting Miss Reed from the others. That had to be Danny, the reluctant outlaw, perhaps developing feelings for their captive. It was a complication, but one that might work in Hunter's favor. For the next hour, Hunter observed the camp, noting the patterns of movement. Frank and Lyle spent most of their time in the main building, occasionally emerging to check the surroundings. The third brother, Michael, appeared briefly to relieve Danny from guard duty, allowing the younger man to get something to eat. Danny, Hunter noticed, took food back to the cabin with him when he returned, confirming that Miss Reed was indeed inside. Hunter considered his options. Attacking 4 armed men head-on would be suicide, even with the element of surprise. His best chance would be to wait until nightfall, then try to reach Miss Reed's cabin undetected. If he could free her and slip away before the alarm was raised. A movement from the cabin caught his eye. The door opened slightly, and Hunter's breath caught in his throat as Nora Reed stepped out, accompanied by Danny Blackwell. She looked tired and her dress was dirty, but she walked without assistance and showed no signs of serious injury. Her chestnut hair was coming loose from its pins, falling around her shoulders in a way Hunter had never seen during her prim appearances in town. Even from this distance, he could see that her hands weren't bound. She stood in the sunlight, lifting her face to its warmth as Danny hovered nearby, his rifle held loosely in his hands. They appeared to be talking, their manner suggesting a relationship far less hostile than captor and captive. Hunter frowned. What game was Miss Reed playing? Was she trying to gain Danny's trust to facilitate an escape? Or had she genuinely formed some bond with her kidnapper? The thought disturbed him more than he cared to admit. He had spent 3 days pushing himself to the brink of collapse to rescue her, driven by a sense of duty that felt surprisingly personal for someone he barely knew. The idea that she might not want or need rescuing hadn't occurred to him. Frank Blackwell emerged from the main building and called to Danny, who reluctantly ushered Miss Reed back into the cabin. Hunter couldn't hear what was said, but Frank's aggressive gestures suggested he was displeased with the younger brother's leniency toward their hostage. Hunter retreated from the ridge, making his way back to where Thunder waited. He needed to reconsider his approach. If Miss Reed wasn't being closely guarded or restrained, perhaps direct communication with her was possible. But that would mean getting much closer to the cabin, at significant risk of discovery. As he reached Thunder, a plan began to form in his mind. He would wait until full dark, then approach the camp from the opposite direction, the direction they would be watching, but not expecting a lone man on foot. If he could create a diversion that drew the brothers away from Miss Reed's cabin, he might have a chance to reach her. The hours until sunset passed with excruciating slowness. Hunter dozed fitfully, conserving his energy for the night ahead. He checked and rechecked his weapons, running through scenarios in his mind. As the sun finally dipped below the western peaks, he gave Thunder a reassuring pat. "Wait here, boy," he murmured. "If all goes well, we'll be back before dawn. If not—" He didn't finish the thought. Hunter made his way down the mountainside, circling around to approach the mining camp from the main trail. The full moon provided enough light to navigate, but also increased the risk of being spotted. He moved carefully from shadow to shadow, freezing at every sound. The camp was quiet as he drew closer. A single lantern burned in the main building, casting dim light through its grimy windows. The other cabins were dark, including the one where Miss Reed was held. Hunter crouched behind a boulder at the edge of the clearing, studying the layout one final time. His diversion needed to draw everyone's attention away from Miss Reed's cabin. Fire would do it. The wooden structures would burn quickly in this dry mountain air, but he rejected the idea immediately. He wouldn't risk Miss Reed's safety, nor did he wish to destroy evidence that might be needed for the Blackwell's prosecution. Instead, he decided on a simpler approach. Taking careful aim with the Winchester, Hunter fired 3 rapid shots into the corral area, well away from the horses but close enough to startle them into a panic. The animals immediately began whinnying and crashing against the corral fence. As expected, the door to the main building flew open, Frank and Lyle Blackwell rushing out with guns drawn. Michael emerged from one of the other cabins, looking around wildly. "The horses," Frank shouted. "Someone's trying to steal the horses." Hunter fired again, this time into the dirt near Frank's feet, sending the outlaw diving for cover. The confusion was exactly what he needed. Keeping low, he circled around toward Miss Reed's cabin. He was halfway there when the cabin door opened, Danny Blackwell stepping out with his rifle raised. Hunter froze, pressed against the side of the main building, barely breathing as Danny peered into the darkness. "What's happening?" came a woman's voice from inside the cabin, Miss Reed's voice. "Stay inside, Nora," Danny replied urgently. "Someone's out there." Hunter's jaw tightened at the familiar way Danny used Miss Reed's first name. He waited until Danny took a few steps away from the cabin, then moved swiftly and silently behind him. Before the young outlaw could react, Hunter pressed the barrel of his Colt against the back of Danny's head. "Drop the rifle," he ordered quietly, "and don't make a sound." Danny tensed but complied, the rifle falling to the dirt with a soft thud. "You're the sheriff from San Andreas," he said, barely above a whisper. "I recognize your voice from when you questioned me in town last month." "That's right," Hunter confirmed, surprised the young man remembered. "I'm taking Miss Reed back where she belongs." "She's not hurt," Danny said quickly. "I've been protecting her. My brothers wanted to." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "I wouldn't let them touch her." Hunter believed him, but it didn't change the situation. "Step aside, Danny. You're under arrest for bank robbery and kidnapping, and your brothers will hang for murder." "I never wanted any part of the killing," Danny insisted. "I tried to stop them, but Frank shot that deputy before I could." His words were cut off by a shout from across the camp. "Danny, what's going on over there?" Hunter reacted instantly, shoving Danny toward the cabin door. Inside. Now. They burst into the small cabin, Hunter kicking the door shut behind them. In the dim moonlight streaming through the single window, he could make out Nora Reed standing by a narrow cot, her eyes wide with alarm. "Sheriff Lockhart," she gasped. "Miss Reed," he acknowledged, keeping his gun on Danny. "Are you injured?" She shook her head, her expression a complex mixture of relief and concern. "No, I'm unharmed." Her eyes flicked to Danny. "Thanks to him." Hunter didn't have time to process the implications of her words or tone. Outside, he could hear Frank Blackwell shouting orders, organizing his brothers to search the camp. "We need to move," Hunter said. "Is there a back way out of this cabin?" Danny nodded. "There's a trapdoor under the bed, leads to a root cellar with access to a ventilation shaft from the mine. It comes out about 100 yards up the mountainside." Hunter regarded the young outlaw suspiciously. "Why would you tell us that?" Danny looked at Nora, his expression pained. "Because she deserves to go home, and because I'm tired of running with my brothers." He turned back to Hunter. "I'll surrender to you, Sheriff. Face whatever punishment I've earned. But please, get her out of here first." Hunter studied Danny's face, searching for signs of deception but finding only resignation and what appeared to be genuine concern for Nora's safety. "Danny, no," Nora protested, stepping closer to him. "Come with us. Tell the judge what you just told the sheriff. You tried to stop the killings, you protected me. I'm still guilty, Nora," Danny said gently, "but I can at least do one right thing by helping you escape." He looked at Hunter. "I'll create a distraction. Draw my brothers away so you can get her out through the cellar." Hunter hesitated, his lawman's instincts warring with the practical need to get Miss Reed to safety. "You'll turn yourself in. Give yourself up in San Andreas when this is over." "You have my word," Danny said firmly. A loud banging on the cabin door interrupted them. "Danny, open up!" Frank Blackwell's voice boomed. "What's going on in there?" Danny moved to the bed, quickly shoving it aside to reveal a trapdoor in the rough wooden floor. "Go now," he urged. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." Hunter made his decision. "Miss Reed, come with me." He turned to Danny. "I'll expect to see you in San Andreas within the week, or I'll come hunting you again." Danny nodded, then did something unexpected. He removed his gun belt and handed it to Hunter. "So you know I mean it." The pounding on the door grew more insistent. Frank was shouting threats now, and Hunter could hear Lil suggesting they shoot through the door. "Go," Danny whispered urgently. Hunter holstered his revolver and took Nora's hand, leading her to the trapdoor. As he helped her down into the darkness below, their eyes met briefly. There was something in her gaze, gratitude, certainly, but also something deeper that Hunter couldn't identify in that fraught moment. "Thank you for coming for me," she whispered. Hunter nodded, unable to formulate a proper response with Frank Blackwell threatening to burn down the cabin around them. He followed Nora down into the root cellar, pulling the trapdoor closed above them just as the sound of splintering wood indicated the Blackwells had broken through the door. The root cellar was pitch black and smelled of damp earth. Hunter struck a match, illuminating their surroundings just enough to locate the ventilation shaft. Danny had mentioned a narrow tunnel barely large enough for a man to crawl through. "Stay close behind me," Hunter instructed, dropping to his hands and knees. "It's going to be tight." Above them, they could hear muffled shouting as Danny presumably confronted his brothers. A gunshot made Nora gasp, but they couldn't afford to wait and learn what had happened. Hunter began crawling into the shaft, feeling his way forward in the darkness as Nora followed. The shaft was longer than Danny had implied, and narrower in places than Hunter would have liked. Several times he had to turn sideways to squeeze through, and he wondered how Nora was managing in her dress. But she made no complaint, her steady breathing behind him the only indication of her presence. Finally, after what seemed an eternity of claustrophobic darkness, Hunter saw a faint glimmer of moonlight ahead. The shaft widened as it approached the exit, allowing him to move more freely. He peered cautiously out of the opening, a crude grate set into the mountainside, partially concealed by scrub brush. "Wait here," he whispered to Nora, then pushed the grate aside and slipped out, drawing his Colt as he scanned the area. The exit was indeed about 100 yards up the slope from the mining camp, providing a clear view of the cabins below. The main building was now fully lit, and Hunter could see shadows moving inside Miss Reed's cabin. Of Danny, there was no sign. Satisfied they weren't being watched, Hunter reached back to help Nora out of the shaft. Her hands were cold as they gripped his, and she emerged covered in dirt but otherwise intact. Her hair had completely fallen from its pins now, cascading over her shoulders in a way that momentarily distracted Hunter from their predicament. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She nodded, brushing dirt from her skirts. "Yes. What about Danny, that gunshot?" "I don't know," Hunter admitted, "but we can't go back for him. I need to get you to safety first." He hesitated, then added, "If he meant what he said about surrendering, he'll find a way." Nora looked unconvinced but didn't argue. "What now?" "Now we get to my horse and ride out of here before they realize we've escaped." Hunter took her hand again, leading her carefully up the rocky slope, staying in the shadows of boulders and stunted pines. The route was considerably more difficult than his earlier approach, and he found himself supporting Nora as she struggled with her long skirts and impractical shoes. They had covered perhaps half the distance to where Thunder waited when a shout from the mining camp indicated their absence had been discovered. Lantern light began moving erratically below as the Blackwells spread out to search. "We need to hurry," Hunter urged, increasing their pace despite the treacherous terrain. Nora stumbled and he caught her around the waist, steadying her. For a brief moment they were pressed together, her face inches from his. Even in the moonlight he could see the flush that rose to her cheeks. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly looking away. They continued upward, the sounds of pursuit growing fainter as they put distance between themselves and the camp. By the time they reached Thunder, the night had grown quiet again, though Hunter knew the Blackwells wouldn't give up easily. The horse nickered softly in greeting, clearly relieved to see his master. Hunter quickly untethered him, then turned to Nora. "I'll help you up first, then mount behind you," he said. "It'll be a tight fit, but Thunder can handle us both for a while." He clasped his hands to give her a boost up, but Nora hesitated. "Sheriff Lockhart, I need to explain about Danny." Hunter frowned. "Miss Reed, we don't have time, please," she interrupted. "I need you to understand, he wasn't like the others. When they took me from the bank, it was Danny who made sure I wasn't harmed. He stood up to his brothers, told them he'd shoot them himself if they touched me." Her voice trembled slightly. "He was kind to me, told me stories about growing up on their farm before their parents died. About how Frank raised them afterward, taught them the only way he knew to survive." Hunter wasn't sure what to make of this revelation, or why it seemed so important to her that he understand. He still robbed that bank, still stood by while his brothers murdered Samuel and Timothy. "I know," she said quietly, "and he knows it too. That's why he was willing to sacrifice himself just now. He's a good man who made terrible choices, Sheriff." She looked up at him earnestly. I want you to remember that when he comes to turn himself in." Hunter nodded slowly. "I'll remember." He gestured to Thunder. "Now please, let me help you up. We need to put as much distance as possible between us and the Blackwells before dawn." This time Nora accepted his help, settling into the saddle as Hunter mounted behind her. The arrangement was indeed snug, with Nora seated in front of him, her back pressed against his chest. Hunter reached around her to take the reins, acutely aware of her nearness, of the scent of her hair despite the dirt and smoke that clung to them both. "Hold on," he instructed, nudging Thunder forward. The horse moved carefully through the rocky terrain, picking his way back toward the game trail that would lead them down from the mountains. Hunter kept their pace moderate, not wanting to risk injury to the horse in the darkness, despite the danger of pursuit. They rode in silence for a time, both alert for sounds of the Blackwells. Gradually, as the mining camp fell further behind, Hunter felt some of the tension leave Nora's body. She leaned back against him, fatigue evident in the way she struggled to stay upright. "You can rest," he told her. "I won't let you fall." "I haven't slept properly in days," she admitted. "Every time I closed my eyes, I was afraid of what might happen." "You're safe now," Hunter assured her, his voice low near her ear. "I've got you." Nora turned her head slightly, looking up at him in the moonlight. "You came for me alone. That was either very brave or very foolish, Sheriff Lockhart." Despite everything, Hunter found himself smiling. "Probably a bit of both, Miss Reed." "Nora," she corrected him gently. "After all this, I think you can call me Nora." "Then I'm Hunter," he replied. The formality of Sheriff and Miss Reed seemed suddenly inadequate for what they'd just experienced together. "Hunter," she repeated as if testing the name. "It suits you." She fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, broken only by Thunder's steady hoofbeats and the occasional call of a night bird. As they navigated the treacherous game trail, Hunter found himself reflecting on the events that had brought them to this moment. 3 days ago, Nora Reed had been little more than an acquaintance, the new schoolteacher he'd tipped his hat to on the boardwalk. Now she was here in his arms, trusting him with her life, and he was startled by how right it felt. They reached the main trail just as the eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Thunder was showing signs of fatigue from carrying double, so Hunter guided him to a small clearing beside a stream. "We should rest here for a bit," he said, dismounting and helping Nora down. Her legs nearly gave way as her feet touched the ground, and Hunter caught her by the waist, steadying her until she found her balance. "Sorry," she murmured, clearly embarrassed. "I seem to be less resilient than I thought." "You've been through an ordeal," Hunter replied. "Most people would have broken down completely." He led Thunder to the stream, allowing the horse to drink while he refilled their canteen. "We'll rest for an hour, then push on to Martha Wilson's cabin. It's safer than stopping in the open, and she'll have food and proper water for Thunder." Nora sank down onto a fallen log, stretching her legs out in front of her with a wince. "Martha Wilson, a kind woman who helped me when I was tracking you," Hunter explained, "gave me food, rest, and directions to the mining camp." He returned to Nora's side, offering her the canteen. "She also gave me this rifle, which came in handy." Nora drank deeply, then handed back the canteen. "I'll have to thank her then. It seems I owe my rescue to both of you." She looked up at him with a small smile. "And to Thunder, of course." Hunter chuckled, appreciating her attempt at lightness despite their situation. "He's earned an extra measure of oats, that's for certain." He grew serious again, studying her face in the growing light. "Nora, I need to ask, did the Blackwells hurt you at all?" "You don't have to tell me details, but as sheriff—" "They didn't," she interrupted firmly. "Frank threatened, Lyle leered, but Danny never left my side. He made it clear I was under his protection." She looked down at her hands, twisting together in her lap. "I was frightened, of course. Terrified at times, but they didn't. They didn't harm me in the way you're asking about." Relief washed over Hunter, followed by renewed anger at the Blackwell brothers for putting her through such an ordeal. "I'm glad," he said simply, "though it doesn't excuse what they did." "No," Nora agreed quietly. "It doesn't. They rested in companionable silence, Hunter tending to Thunder while Nora closed her eyes, leaning back against a tree trunk. She didn't truly sleep, Hunter could tell from her breathing, but she seemed to find some peace in the quiet morning air. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, they mounted up again. This time Hunter placed Nora behind him, where she could hold onto his waist for support. The change in position somehow felt more intimate, her arms encircling him as Thunder carried them steadily downward toward the valley where Martha's cabin lay. They reached the cabin by mid-morning, greeted by Martha's surprised face as she stepped out onto her porch, shotgun in hand, until she recognized Hunter. "Well, I'll be," she said, lowering the weapon. "You actually did it." Her eyes moved to Nora, taking in the schoolteacher's disheveled appearance with a mixture of concern and approval. "Miss Reed, I presume?" "Yes, madam," Nora replied, sliding carefully from Thunder's back with Hunter's assistance. "And you must be Mrs. Wilson. The sheriff tells me I have you to thank for helping with my rescue." Martha waved away the thanks. "Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use some hot food and a wash." She led them into the cabin, already moving to stoke the fire in her cook stove. "Sheriff, see to your horse, then come join us. There's water in the basin for washing up." Hunter nodded, leading Thunder to the small barn where the horse could rest properly. As he removed the saddle and bridle, he found himself smiling at Martha's no-nonsense manner. The woman reminded him a bit of his own mother, practical, kind, and impossible to argue with. When he returned to the cabin, he found Nora seated at the table, her face and hands freshly washed, her hair combed back and pinned up once more. She looked more like the schoolteacher he remembered from San Andreas, though the shadows under her eyes spoke of her ordeal. Martha set bowls of hot stew before them both, along with thick slices of bread and mugs of strong coffee. "Eat," she instructed. "Then you can tell me how you managed to sneak Miss Reed right out from under the noses of those outlaws." As they ate, Hunter recounted their escape from the mining camp, including Danny Blackwell's unexpected assistance. Martha listened intently, nodding occasionally, her sharp eyes moving between Hunter and Nora as if assessing something beyond the story itself. "And the young Blackwell boy promised to turn himself in?" she asked when Hunter finished. "He did," Hunter confirmed. "Though whether he'll follow through." "He will," Nora said with quiet conviction. "Danny keeps his word." Martha raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on Nora's certainty. Instead, she stood and moved to a small chest in the corner of the room. "Miss Reed, I have some clean clothes that might fit you. They belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to Bozeman. Nothing fancy, mind you, but better than what you're wearing now." "That's very kind, Mrs. Wilson," Nora said gratefully. "I'd appreciate it tremendously." Martha nodded, extracting a simple blue dress and undergarments from the chest. "You can wash up properly in the back room. There's a tub and I've got hot water on the stove." She turned to Hunter. "And you, Sheriff, can wait on the porch while the lady makes herself presentable." Hunter didn't argue, stepping outside into the late morning sunshine. He leaned against the porch railing, finally allowing himself to acknowledge the bone-deep exhaustion that had been held at bay by necessity. They were safe now, at least for the moment. The Blackwells wouldn't know where they'd gone, and even if they managed to track them this far, Martha's shotgun and Hunter's weapons would ensure a warm reception. He found his thoughts turning to Nora, to the way she'd remained composed throughout their escape, to her compassion toward Danny Blackwell, to the feel of her in his arms as they rode through the night. There was a strength in her he hadn't fully appreciated before, a quiet resilience that had allowed her to endure her captivity without breaking. Hunter was still lost in these reflections when Martha joined him on the porch, a knowing look in her eye. "She's a remarkable young woman," Martha observed casually. "Yes," Hunter agreed, not bothering to pretend misunderstanding. "She is. And you've developed feelings for her." Hunter straightened, uncomfortable with Martha's directness. "I barely know her," Martha chuckled. "Sometimes that doesn't matter. Sometimes you just know." She patted his arm. "My Joseph proposed to me 3 days after we met. Folks said we were crazy, but we've had 30 good years together." Hunter didn't respond, unsure what to say. He couldn't deny that something had shifted in his feelings toward Nora Reed, but he wasn't prepared to name it or examine it too closely, not yet. Martha seemed to sense his discomfort and changed the subject. "What's your plan now? The Blackwells will be looking for you both." "We'll rest here today if that's all right with you," Hunter replied. "Then leave at first light tomorrow for San Andreas. It's about 2 days' ride, and I'd rather not stop in any towns along the way where word might get back to the Blackwells." Martha nodded approvingly. "Smart. And you're welcome to stay as long as needed." She glanced toward the door. "I'll go check on Miss Reed. You should get some rest yourself, Sheriff. You look ready to drop." After Martha went inside, Hunter found a comfortable spot in the shade of a large pine near the cabin. He settled with his back against the trunk, hat pulled low over his eyes, intending only to rest for a few minutes. Instead, he fell into a deep sleep, the events of the past days finally catching up with him. He woke to the sound of female laughter, a pleasant sound that momentarily confused him until he remembered where he was. Sitting up, he saw Nora and Martha hanging laundry on a line stretched between 2 trees. Nora was wearing the blue dress Martha had provided, her hair loose around her shoulders as it dried in the afternoon sun. She looked transformed, still tired, but with a lightness to her movements that hadn't been there before. Hunter watched them for a moment, struck by how quickly Nora seemed to have formed a bond with Martha. The 2 women worked together companionably, their conversation punctuated by occasional laughter. It was a scene of such normal domesticity that it made the dangers of the mining camp seem almost like a bad dream. Nora noticed him first, turning with a smile that sent an unexpected warmth through Hunter's chest. "The dead awaken," she called teasingly. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd sleep through dinner as well as lunch." Hunter rose to his feet, brushing pine needles from his clothes. "How long was I asleep?" "A good 5 hours," Martha replied with satisfaction. "Needed it too, by the look of you." Hunter couldn't argue with that. He felt more clear-headed than he had in days. The fog of exhaustion finally lifted. He joined the women, automatically reaching to help Nora hang a wet shirt on the line. "Thank you," she said, their fingers brushing as she passed him a clothespin. "Though I'm perfectly capable of hanging laundry myself, Sheriff." "Hunter," he reminded her, "and I never doubted your capabilities, not after watching you escape from a gang of outlaws without losing your composure." A faint blush colored Nora's cheeks. "I had help," she pointed out. "Quite competent help at that." Martha watched this exchange with barely concealed amusement. "I'll start dinner," she announced. "You 2 finish up here." As Martha headed back to the cabin, Hunter and Nora continued hanging the laundry in a silence that felt charged with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Nora broke it. "I want to thank you properly," she said, not looking at him as she smoothed a damp pillowcase on the line. "For coming after me. I know it wasn't just because you're the sheriff. You risked your life, pushed yourself beyond exhaustion." She paused, finally turning to face him. Why? Hunter had asked himself the same question during those long days of pursuit. Why had he felt so driven, so unable to rest until he found her? Yes, she was a citizen of his town, and yes, it was his duty to protect her. But it had been more than that, though he'd been reluctant to admit it even to himself. Because from the moment you arrived in San Andreas, you've been different, he said finally. "Most new settlers, especially women alone, they're fearful, tentative. But you stepped off that stagecoach with your head high, looking at our dusty little town like it was exactly where you wanted to be." Nora looked surprised. "You remember my arrival?" Hunter nodded. "I remember thinking you'd either leave within a month, driven away by the hardships, or you'd put down roots so deep that nothing could uproot you." He smiled slightly. "I was betting on the latter, and that's why you came after me, because you admired my, stubbornness." "Courage," Hunter corrected. "And yes, that's part of it." He hesitated, then admitted, "The rest I'm still figuring out." Nora studied him for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. "Well, when you do figure it out, Sheriff Lockhart, I'd be interested to hear your conclusions." With that, she hung the last piece of laundry and headed toward the cabin, leaving Hunter to wonder if he'd said too much or not enough. Dinner that evening was a pleasant affair, the simple food made delicious by hunger and good company. Martha regaled them with stories of her years in the mountains, while Hunter shared some of the more amusing aspects of being sheriff in a growing mining town. Nora spoke of her journey west from Boston, where she'd taught at a girls' academy before deciding she needed a change and answering San Andreas's advertisement for a teacher. "What made you choose such a remote town?" Martha asked her. "An educated lady like yourself could have found a position in any number of more civilized places." Nora smiled, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with one finger. "Perhaps I wanted something less civilized. In Boston, everything was predetermined: who I could speak to, what opinions I could express, how I should dress and behave at all times." She looked up, a spark of defiance in her eyes. "Out here, people judge you more by what you do than by who your family is or which church you attend." Hunter had never considered it from that perspective, having grown up in the West. "San Andreas has its share of gossips and social restrictions," he warned. "Mrs. Holcomb and her sewing circle can be as judgmental as any Boston society matron." "Oh, I'm well aware," Nora laughed. "They've already let me know that an unmarried schoolteacher should never be seen entering the Silver Dollar Saloon, even if it's just to deliver a note to a parent who works there." Hunter remembered that incident, Nora calmly explaining to a scandalized Mrs. Holcomb that she wouldn't neglect a student's education just because his mother worked as a barmaid. It was one of the first times he'd noticed her as more than just the new schoolteacher. After dinner, Martha insisted on sleeping in the barn so that Nora could have the bedroom. "I've slept in worse places," she said when Nora protested. "And you need a proper night's rest before your journey tomorrow." Hunter prepared to bed down on the cabin floor near the hearth, spreading his bedroll on the rough wooden planks. As he did so, he was acutely aware of Nora moving about the small cabin, preparing for bed. There was an intimacy to the situation that both unsettled and pleased him. "Good night, Hunter," she said softly as she paused at the bedroom door. The lamplight caught the auburn highlights in her hair, creating a halo effect that made Hunter's breath catch. "Good night, Nora," he replied, watching as she disappeared into the small bedroom, pulling the door closed behind her. Sleep came quickly despite his nap earlier in the day. Hunter drifted off to the sound of the wind in the pines and the occasional soft creak of the cabin settling. He woke before dawn, years of early rising ingrained in him. Moving quietly so as not to disturb Nora, he built up the fire and put coffee on to boil. Martha joined him shortly, coming in from the barn with fresh eggs for breakfast. "Sleep well?" she asked in a low voice. "Better than I have in days," Hunter admitted. "Thank you again for your hospitality, Martha. I won't forget it." "Just bring that rifle back when you can," she replied gruffly, though her eyes were kind. "And take good care of that schoolteacher. She's the sort that's worth keeping." Before Hunter could respond to this rather direct statement, the bedroom door opened and Nora appeared, already dressed in the blue dress Martha had given her, her hair neatly pinned up. If Hunter had thought her beautiful in the lamplight last night, she was even more so in the soft glow of early morning. "Something smells wonderful," she said, smiling as she joined them. "Can I help with breakfast, Mrs. Wilson?" Martha, the older woman, corrected. "And you can set the table if you like. We'll need to get you both on the road soon if you want to make good distance before nightfall." They ate quickly, the mood more subdued than the previous evening. The reality of the journey ahead and the possibility that the Blackwells might still be searching for them weighed on all their minds. As they prepared to depart, Martha handed Nora a small bundle. "Some food for the road," she explained, "and a warmer shawl for when night falls. The mountains get cold, even in summer." "You're too kind," Nora said, impulsively hugging the older woman. "I hope I can repay your generosity someday." Martha returned the embrace, then stepped back with a suspicious brightness in her eyes. "Just live well," she said gruffly. "That's repayment enough." Hunter had already saddled Thunder, who seemed well rested and eager to be moving. The horse would still be carrying double, but the terrain ahead would be easier than the mountain paths they'd traversed the previous day. They said their final goodbyes to Martha, who stood on her porch watching as Hunter helped Nora into the saddle, then mounted behind her. This time she settled against him with more ease, her body fitting naturally against his as if they'd ridden together many times before. "Ready?" he asked, his voice close to her ear. She nodded, and he felt her take a deep breath as if steeling herself for whatever lay ahead. "Ready." They rode away from the cabin, Hunter raising his hand in a final farewell to Martha, who waved back until they disappeared into the trees. The journey to San Andreas would take them through open country, for much of the way easier riding, but with less cover if the Blackwells were on their trail. For the first few hours, they rode in companionable silence, both scanning the terrain for any signs of pursuit. Thunder maintained a steady pace, seemingly understanding the importance of their journey. When they stopped at midday to rest and water the horse at a small creek, Hunter found himself watching Nora as she washed her face in the cool water, struck again by her quiet strength. "What is it?" she asked, catching him staring. "Just thinking that most women who'd been through what you have would be falling apart by now," he replied honestly. "But here you are, riding all day without complaint, keeping watch for outlaws." Nora smiled wryly. "Oh, I had my moments of falling apart during those first days with the Blackwells. I cried myself to sleep more than once." She straightened, pushing a loose strand of hair back from her face. "But then I realized that tears weren't going to get me home, keeping my wits about me might." Hunter nodded, understanding. "You remind me of my mother," he said, then immediately winced at how that sounded. "I mean, not that that is, she was also." Nora laughed, a genuine sound of amusement that made Hunter's embarrassment worth it. "I understand, Sheriff. You meant it as a compliment to both of us." Her expression grew more serious. "Tell me about her." Hunter hadn't spoken much about his parents in years. Both had been gone for over a decade now, his father to a mining accident and his mother to the influenza that had swept through San Andreas 2 winters later. "She was strong," he said finally, "not just in character but physically too. She could chop wood, mend fences, shoot better than most men in town." He smiled at the memory. "But she was gentle too. Used to sing to me and my sister at night, even when she was bone-tired from working all day." "You have a sister?" Nora asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Had," Hunter corrected, the old pain dulled but still present. "She married a cavalry officer who was stationed near San Andreas for a while. They moved east to Fort Lincoln about 8 years ago. Influenza took them both during an outbreak there. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly, touching his arm briefly. "You've lost a lot." Hunter shrugged, uncomfortable with the sympathy. "Everyone out here has lost someone. It's the nature of this life." He moved to check Thunder's saddle. "We should keep moving. I'd like to reach Willow Creek by nightfall." As they continued their journey, Hunter found Nora asking more questions about his life in San Andreas, his years as sheriff, the people in town. He answered readily enough, though he was more accustomed to listening than talking about himself. In turn, he learned more about her life in Boston, her decision to become a teacher, her desire to see more of the country than just the settled East. "My parents were scandalized when I announced I was going west," she told him, a hint of mischief in her voice. "My father said no daughter of his would teach the children of miners and cowboys. My mother was certain I'd be scalped by Indians within a week." Hunter chuckled. "And yet you came anyway." "I've always been rather stubborn," she admitted. "Once I make up my mind, very little can change it." "I'll remember that," Hunter replied, finding that he very much wanted to remember everything about Nora Reed. They reached Willow Creek just as the sun was setting, a small settlement consisting of little more than a trading post, a livery stable, and a handful of cabins. Hunter considered seeking lodging, but decided against it the fewer people who saw them together, the less chance of word reaching the Blackwells. Instead, they purchased supplies from the trading post, proper trail food to supplement what Martha had provided, a canteen for Nora, and a blanket for the cool night ahead. The trader, a grizzled old-timer named Fergus, eyed them curiously but asked no questions beyond what they needed to buy. They made camp a mile outside town, in a sheltered hollow near a small stream. Hunter built a small fire, just enough to heat coffee and cook a simple meal of bacon and beans. Nora helped without being asked, moving around the campsite as if she'd done this many times before. "You're surprisingly adept at this," Hunter observed as she efficiently laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. "I may have grown up in Boston, but I wasn't entirely sheltered," she replied with a smile. "My uncle owned a hunting lodge in Maine. I spent several summers there as a girl, much to my mother's dismay." The image of a young Nora, hair in braids, learning to build fires and clean fish, made Hunter smile. It explained some of her resilience, her comfort with the rough conditions they now faced. As they sat by the fire after their meal, the night settled around them, bringing with it a deeper sort of quiet. Thunder dozed nearby, occasionally snorting softly in his sleep. The stars emerged one by one, brilliant against the black canvas of the sky. "It's beautiful," Nora said softly, looking upward. "You never see stars like this in the city." Hunter followed her gaze. "One of the things I love about this country, no matter how hard the day's been, the stars come out at night, same as always." They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence, filled with the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a coyote. Hunter found himself studying Nora's profile in the firelight, the delicate curve of her cheek, the determined set of her chin. In the 3 days they'd been together, she had somehow transformed from Miss Reed the schoolteacher to Nora, a woman of surprising complexity and strength. As if sensing his thoughts, she turned to look at him, her expression questioning. "What are you thinking about so intently, Sheriff?" "You," he admitted, too tired for pretense. "How different you are from what I first thought." "And what did you first think?" Hunter considered his words carefully. "That you were just passing through, that San Andreas was a stepping stone to somewhere else for you." Nora tilted her head. "And now I think you might belong there more than most who were born to it." She smiled, the firelight catching the gold flecks in her eyes. "That might be the nicest thing anyone has said to me since I arrived." She looked back up at the stars. I do feel at home there more than I expected to, even after everything that's happened. Will you stay? Hunter asked, trying to keep his tone casual despite how much the answer suddenly mattered to him. Nora was quiet for a long moment. I think I will, she said finally. The children need a teacher and I've found something there I didn't have in Boston. What's that? Purpose, she replied simply. And freedom to be myself. Hunter nodded, understanding. San Andreas, for all its rough edges, was a place where a person could carve out their own place, define themselves by their actions rather than their background. It was why he had stayed all these years, even when opportunities had arisen elsewhere. I'm glad, he said softly. San Andreas would be poorer without you. Nora looked at him then, really looked at him, as if trying to read something in his face. Whatever she saw made her smile, a gentle curve of her lips that affected Hunter more powerfully than he would have thought possible. Thank you, Hunter, she said. That means a great deal coming from you. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Then Nora yawned, breaking the spell, and Hunter realized how exhausted she must be despite her stoic demeanor. You should get some sleep, he said, standing to add wood to the fire. We have another long day of riding tomorrow. Nora nodded, rising gracefully. What about you? I'll take first watch, Hunter replied. Old habit, I'll wake you in a few hours to take your turn. She looked about to protest, then seemed to think better of it. All right. Good night, Hunter. Good night, Nora. She settled into her bedroll, pulling Martha's shawl over her shoulders for added warmth. Hunter sat with his back against a tree, rifle across his lap, listening to the night sounds and watching the slow, steady rise and fall of Nora's breathing as she drifted into sleep. He didn't wake her for her turn at watch. Instead, he kept vigil through the night, dozing occasionally but mostly alert, guarding Nora's sleep as if it were the most important duty he'd ever been assigned. Perhaps, he reflected as dawn began to color the eastern sky, it was. Their second day of travel passed much like the first, though with growing anticipation as familiar landmarks appeared, signaling their approach to San Andreas. They encountered no sign of the Blackwells, and by midday Hunter began to believe they had either lost interest in pursuit or had headed in a different direction entirely. As they crested a hill in the late afternoon, the town of San Andreas came into view in the valley below a collection of wooden buildings along a main street, with smaller houses and cabins scattered up the hillsides. The mine that had given birth to the town was visible as a dark scar on the mountain beyond. Home, Nora said softly, and Hunter felt her body relax against his. Home, he agreed, surprised at how right it felt to say that word with her. They rode down into the town just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the dusty main street. Heads turned as they passed Sheriff Lockhart returning with the kidnapped schoolteacher, both looking trail-worn but very much alive. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had begun to gather. Hunter dismounted first, then helped Nora down, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Deputy Jim Collins, his broken leg still splinted, hobbled out onto the boardwalk to greet them. "Sheriff, Miss Reed," he exclaimed, his weathered face splitting into a broad grin. "We were starting to fear the worst. Takes more than the Blackwell gang to keep us down, Jim," Hunter replied, clapping his deputy on the shoulder. "Is everything all right in town?" "Quiet as can be," Jim assured him, "though folks have been mighty worried about Miss Reed here." He tipped his hat to Nora. "Good to see you safe, madam." "Thank you, Deputy Collins," Nora replied with a warm smile. "It's good to be back." The crowd around them was growing, people calling out greetings and questions. Hunter saw Mayor Patterson pushing his way forward, followed closely by Mrs. Holcomb and several other members of the town council. "Perhaps we should continue this inside," Hunter suggested to Nora, not wanting her to be overwhelmed after everything she'd been through. "You can give your statement about what happened and then get some proper rest." Nora nodded gratefully. "That would be best, I think." They moved into the sheriff's office, though Mayor Patterson and Mrs. Holcomb insisted on accompanying them. Jim took Thunder to the livery stable, promising to see that the horse was well cared for after his long journey. Inside, Hunter guided Nora to a chair by his desk, positioning himself protectively nearby as the mayor began peppering them with questions. Mrs. Holcomb, meanwhile, was eyeing Nora's borrowed blue dress and loose hair with obvious disapproval. "My dear Miss Reed," she interrupted, cutting off the mayor mid-sentence, "you must be absolutely exhausted and in need of proper attire." She shot Hunter a look that suggested he was somehow at fault for Nora's appearance. "I shall take you to my home immediately, where you can bathe and change into something more suitable." Hunter saw a flash of irritation cross Nora's face, quickly masked. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Holcomb," she said politely. "But I would prefer to give my statement to Sheriff Lockhart first, while the details are still fresh in my mind." "Surely that can wait until tomorrow," Mrs. Holcomb protested. "After all you've been through." "What I've been through," Nora interrupted with quiet firmness, "is precisely why I wish to make my statement now. The Blackwell gang is still at large, and my information may help in their capture." Hunter suppressed a smile at Mrs. Holcomb's startled expression. Clearly, the good lady had expected a delicate, traumatized victim in need of coddling, not this composed woman with a clear sense of priorities. "Mrs. Holcomb," he said, stepping in, "perhaps you could arrange for some fresh clothing to be brought here for Miss Reed, and maybe something to eat." That would be tremendously helpful. This approach, appealing to her desire to be useful without contradicting her, directly worked. Mrs. Holcomb straightened, already planning. "Of course, Sheriff. I'll send my girl over with a proper dress immediately, and some hot soup from the hotel restaurant." "Thank you," Hunter said sincerely. "That would be most appreciated." After Mrs. Holcomb departed, the mayor insisted on hearing at least the basics of what had happened. Hunter provided a brief account, emphasizing Nora's courage and downplaying the more dangerous aspects of their escape. Nora added details where appropriate, her clear, steady voice giving no hint of the terror she must have felt during her captivity. "Amazing," Mayor Patterson said when they finished. "Simply amazing. Miss Reed, you are a credit to our town." He turned to Hunter. "And you, Sheriff, riding out alone after those killers. That's the kind of dedication we need in law enforcement." Hunter accepted the praise with a nod, though inwardly he recognized that his actions had been driven by more than just professional dedication. "Just doing my job, Mayor." "Well, I won't keep you any longer," Patterson said, rising to leave. "I'm sure you both need rest, but the town will want to hear this story in full. Perhaps a special town meeting in a few days." "Perhaps," Hunter replied noncommittally, knowing that Nora might not want to relive the experience for public entertainment. "We'll see how things develop with the Blackwell gang still at large." After the mayor left, Hunter closed the door behind him with a sigh of relief. "I apologize for that," he said, turning back to Nora. "They mean well, but they have no idea what it was really like," she finished for him. She looked tired now, the composure she'd maintained beginning to crack. "Is it always like this, after you bring someone home safely?" Hunter moved to sit on the edge of his desk near her chair. "Not usually. But then, I don't usually bring home kidnapped schoolteachers who have captured the town's heart." A small smile curved Nora's lips. "The town's heart, is it?" Before Hunter could respond, there was a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Holcomb's maid, bearing a bundle of clothing and a covered tray that smelled deliciously of chicken soup. Hunter directed the girl to place the items on his desk, thanked her, and closed the door firmly behind her. "You should eat," he told Nora, uncovering the tray to reveal a large bowl of soup, fresh bread, and a pot of tea. "And then perhaps you'd like to change. There's a small room in the back with a washstand." Nora nodded gratefully. "That sounds wonderful." She reached for the soup, then paused, looking up at him. "Will you join me? You must be as hungry as I am." Hunter had been planning to give her privacy, but the invitation in her eyes was impossible to refuse. "I could eat," he admitted, pulling up a chair to sit across from her. They shared the meal, talking little but exchanging glances that seemed to communicate more than words could. When they finished, Nora gathered the clean clothes Mrs. Holcomb had sent and retreated to the back room to change. Hunter used the time to write up a preliminary report on the events of the past days, though his mind kept wandering to the woman in the next room. When Nora emerged, she was wearing a simple gray dress that, while modest and appropriate, somehow failed to suit her as well as Martha's blue one had. Her hair was neatly pinned up again, her face freshly washed. She looked every inch the proper schoolteacher once more, yet Hunter found himself missing the less contained version he'd come to know on the trail. "Much better," she said, smoothing down the skirt of the dress. "Though I must admit, I've grown rather fond of Martha's blue dress." "It suited you," Hunter agreed, rising from his desk. "More than this one does, if you don't mind my saying so." Nora looked surprised, then pleased. "I don't mind at all. In fact, I agree." She glanced down at the somber gray fabric. "Mrs. Holcomb's taste runs to the conservative." "As does most of the town's," Hunter reminded her, "though perhaps that will change in time with the right influence." Their eyes met, and Hunter felt that same connection that had been growing stronger throughout their journey home, a sense of understanding and mutual respect that went beyond words. He wanted to step closer to her, to tell her how much she had come to mean to him in such a short time. But the setting felt wrong and the timing too rushed after all they'd been through. "I should escort you home," he said instead. "You need proper rest in a proper bed." Nora nodded, though she seemed reluctant to end their time together. "Yes, I suppose you're right." She gathered Martha's blue dress and shawl, carefully folding them. Will you come by the schoolhouse tomorrow? I should give my official statement for your records." "Of course," Hunter replied, recognizing the invitation for what it was a reason to see each other again. "Perhaps in the afternoon, after your classes." "That would be perfect." They walked together to the small house that had been provided for the town's teacher, located just behind the schoolhouse. The evening was mild, the streets quiet as most townspeople were at home for supper or at the saloon for more lively entertainment. A few called greetings as they passed, but most simply nodded respectfully, sensing perhaps that the sheriff and schoolteacher had been through enough questioning for one day. At her door, Nora turned to face Hunter, her expression softening in the gathering twilight. "I don't think I ever properly thanked you," she said quietly, "for coming after me, for not giving up." "You don't need to thank me," Hunter replied. "I would have searched for months if that's what it took." Nora studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "Because you're the sheriff." Hunter took a breath, knowing this was a moment of choice. He could give her the safe answer yes because it was his duty, or he could give her the truth. "No," he said finally, "because you're you." The words hung between them, simple but profound in their implication. Nora's eyes widened slightly, then a slow smile spread across her face, not the polite smile of Miss Reed the schoolteacher, but the genuine, radiant smile of Nora, the woman he'd come to admire so deeply. "Good night, Hunter," she said softly, reaching out to briefly touch his hand. "I'll see you tomorrow." "Good night, Nora," he replied, reluctantly stepping back as she entered her home and closed the door. Hunter stood there for a moment longer, looking at the closed door and feeling as if something significant had just happened, something that couldn't be undone, and that would change the course of both their lives. Then, with a mixture of contentment and anticipation, he turned and walked back toward his office, where reports needed to be filed and a town needed its sheriff. But for the first time in years, he found himself looking beyond the duties of his office, toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider before. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Hunter filed his official reports, organized search parties for the Blackwell gang, though there was no sign of them in the area, and resumed his regular duties around San Andreas. Nora returned to teaching, welcomed back by her students with handmade cards and small gifts from grateful parents. They saw each other daily, sometimes just in passing on the street, sometimes for longer conversations when Hunter would stop by the schoolhouse after classes ended. Their friendship deepened, but remained outwardly proper, a necessary concession to the watchful eyes of the townspeople, particularly Mrs. Holcomb and her circle, who seemed to have appointed themselves guardians of the schoolteacher's reputation. It was on the 8th day after their return that Danny Blackwell rode into town, alone and unarmed, his hands raised in surrender as he approached the sheriff's office. Hunter was at his desk when Jim Collins burst in with the news. "Sheriff, young Blackwell just rode up. Says he's here to turn himself in." Hunter was on his feet immediately, hand instinctively moving to his gun. "Alone, far as we can tell," Jim confirmed. "He's outside now, hands up, looking scared as a rabbit." Hunter moved to the window, peering out to see Danny Blackwell sitting atop a tired-looking bay horse, his face pale but determined. True to Jim's description, his hands were raised and he wore no visible weapons. "Keep your rifle on him," Hunter instructed Jim, "but don't shoot unless I give the word. I'm going out to talk to him." Hunter stepped out onto the boardwalk, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered Colt. "Danny Blackwell," he called, "I'm surprised to see you." "I gave my word, Sheriff," Danny replied, his voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "I said I'd turn myself in, and here I am." "Where are your brothers?" Danny shook his head. "Don't know. We split up after you took Miss Reed. Frank was furious, blamed me for letting her escape." His voice dropped. "He said I wasn't his brother anymore." Hunter studied the young man, looking for signs of deception but finding only resignation and perhaps relief. "Dismount slowly," he instructed. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Danny complied, sliding carefully from his horse and standing with his hands still raised. "I want to make a full confession," he said, "about the bank robbery and everything else, but first—" He hesitated. "Is Miss Reed all right? She wasn't hurt getting away." "She's fine," Hunter replied, surprised by the genuine concern in Danny's voice. "Teaching her students as we speak." Relief washed over Danny's face. "Good, that's good." "Come inside," Hunter said, gesturing toward the office door. "We'll take your statement and then you'll be held for trial." Danny nodded, moving toward the sheriff's office with the air of a man who had accepted his fate. As they passed the doorway where Jim stood with his rifle, Danny paused. "I know I'm going to prison, Sheriff, maybe for a long time, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't face up to what I did." Hunter didn't respond immediately, instead directing Danny to a chair near his desk. The young man sat obediently, his shoulders slumped with fatigue and the weight of his situation. "Jim, fetch Doc Miller to check over our prisoner," Hunter instructed. "Then go let Judge Wilson know we'll need him to convene a hearing." As Jim departed, Hunter sat across from Danny, pulling out paper to record his statement. "Start from the beginning," he said, "and don't leave anything out." Danny's confession was thorough and remorseful. He described how his oldest brother Frank had planned the bank robbery, how they hadn't intended for anyone to get hurt, but Frank had panicked when Samuel tried to draw his gun. Danny admitted his part in the robbery, but insisted he had tried to prevent the killings and had protected Miss Reed from his brother's baser intentions. "I know it doesn't make up for what happened," he concluded, his voice hoarse after talking for over an hour. "Samuel Peterson and that young bank teller are still dead, but I want the record to show that I never wanted anyone to get hurt." Hunter finished writing, then looked up at the young man across from him. In another life, under different circumstances, Danny Blackwell might have been a decent man. Even now, there was something in him worth salvaging. "I'll note your cooperation in my report to the judge," Hunter said. "And Miss Reed's statement confirms that you protected her from harm. That might count for something at your trial." Danny nodded, a flicker of hope crossing his face before resignation returned. "Thank you, Sheriff. That's more than I deserve." After Doc Miller examined Danny and pronounced him healthy but exhausted, Hunter locked the young outlaw in one of the 2 cells at the back of his office. Danny accepted this without complaint, stretching out on the narrow cot as if grateful for the chance to rest without looking over his shoulder. Word of Danny Blackwell's surrender spread quickly through San Andreas. By the time school let out for the day, a small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, curious to see the outlaw who had helped kidnap their schoolteacher. Hunter was not surprised when Nora appeared at his door, her expression concerned as she glanced toward the cells at the back. "Is it true?" she asked without preamble. Danny turned himself in. Hunter nodded, rising from his desk to close the door behind her, shutting out the curious onlookers. "Rode in at noon, hands in the air, said he gave his word and meant to keep it." Relief flickered across Nora's face. "I told you he would." "Yes, you did," Hunter acknowledged. "He asked about you, wanted to know if you'd made it back safely." Nora's expression softened. "May I speak with him?" Hunter hesitated. It wasn't standard procedure to allow visitors to prisoners, especially those charged with serious crimes. But then, nothing about this situation was standard. "Briefly," he conceded, "I'll be present the entire time." Nora accepted this condition with a nod, and Hunter led her to the cells at the back of the office. Danny was sitting on the edge of his cot, staring at his hands, but he looked up sharply when he heard them approach. His face registered surprise, then embarrassment as he quickly stood. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I didn't expect to see you." "Hello, Danny," Nora replied gently. "I heard you turned yourself in. That was brave." Danny shook his head. "Not brave, just right." He gripped the bars of his cell, his knuckles whitening. "I'm sorry, Miss Reed. For everything. For the bank, for taking you, for not stopping Frank before he killed those men." "You protected me," Nora reminded him, "when your brothers would have." She trailed off, glancing at Hunter, who kept his expression carefully neutral despite the cold anger that rose at the thought of what might have happened to her. "That doesn't make up for the rest," Danny said, echoing his earlier words to Hunter. "But I want you to know that I meant what I said at the camp. I'm done with that life. Whatever punishment comes, I've earned it." Nora stepped closer to the cell, her expression compassionate. "I believe you, Danny, and I'll tell the judge what you did for me. It may help." Danny's eyes filled with tears, and he quickly wiped them away with the back of his hand. "Thank you, Miss Reed. That means a lot, coming from you." Their conversation continued for a few more minutes, Nora offering words of encouragement while Danny expressed his remorse. Hunter watched them, struck by Nora's capacity for forgiveness and Danny's genuine contrition. It reinforced his growing belief that the young man might be redeemable, given the chance. As they left the cells and returned to the main office, Nora turned to Hunter with determination in her eyes. "I want to testify at his hearing. The judge should know everything, not just that he was part of the gang, but that he tried to protect me and ultimately helped us escape." Hunter nodded, unsurprised by her request. "Judge Wilson is a fair man. He'll take your testimony into account." He hesitated, then added, "But Nora, even with your support, Danny is still likely facing prison time. He was part of a bank robbery where 2 men died." "I understand that," she replied, "but there's a difference between punishment and justice. Danny deserves the chance to make amends, to build a better life when he's served his time." Hunter couldn't help but smile at her fierce defense of a man who had, however reluctantly, participated in her kidnapping. It was so typically Nora, seeing beyond the surface to the person beneath, believing in the possibility of redemption. "I've noted his cooperation in my report," he assured her, "and I'll make sure Judge Wilson understands the full picture." He glanced toward the cells. "For what it's worth, I agree with you. Danny Blackwell isn't like his brothers. There's hope for him yet." Nora's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Hunter." She reached out, briefly touching his hand, "for understanding." The contact was brief but electric, sending a jolt of awareness through Hunter that had nothing to do with their prisoner and everything to do with the remarkable woman standing before him. He wanted to capture her hand, to draw her closer, but the setting was all wrong and there was still so much unsaid between them. Instead, he simply nodded, allowing his eyes to convey what he couldn't yet put into words. "The hearing will be tomorrow morning," he said. "I'll come by the schoolhouse to escort you to the courthouse." "I'll be ready," Nora promised, her eyes lingering on his face before she turned to leave. Hunter watched her go, struck again by how thoroughly she had appended his carefully ordered life in just a few short weeks. Before Nora Reed arrived in San Andreas, he had been content with his role as sheriff, his quiet existence in the small town he'd sworn to protect. Now, he found himself wanting a future that included the intelligent, compassionate schoolteacher, who saw goodness even in a young outlaw who had participated in her kidnapping. The hearing the next morning was well attended, the small courthouse packed with curious townspeople eager to see one of the notorious Blackwell gang brought to justice. Judge Wilson, a stern but fair-minded man in his 60s, presided with appropriate gravity as Hunter presented the charges and evidence against Danny Blackwell. When it was Nora's turn to testify, a hush fell over the courtroom. She spoke clearly and directly, describing her kidnapping but emphasizing Danny's efforts to protect her from his brothers and his assistance in their escape. Her testimony was powerful not just for its content, but for the dignified manner in which she delivered it, without hysteria or exaggeration. "And you believe the defendant was coerced by his older brothers?" Judge Wilson asked her, peering over his spectacles. "I believe he was influenced by them from a young age," Nora replied carefully. "But I also believe he knew what they were doing was wrong and was struggling with his conscience throughout the time I was with them." The judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Danny, who stood with his head bowed, his wrists shackled. "Mr. Blackwell, do you have anything to add to Miss Reed's testimony?" Danny raised his head, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Only that she's been more generous than I deserve, Your Honor. I did try to protect her, but I was still part of the gang that robbed that bank and killed those men. I'm ready to face whatever punishment you think is right." Judge Wilson studied him for a long moment, then turned to Hunter. "Sheriff, what is your recommendation in this case?" Hunter stood, aware of all eyes in the courtroom upon him. "Your Honor, there's no question that Danny Blackwell participated in serious crimes, but his voluntary surrender, his cooperation, and his actions to protect Miss Reed suggest that he is not beyond redemption." He paused, choosing his words carefully. I believe justice would be served by a prison sentence that acknowledges the severity of his crimes, but also allows for the possibility of rehabilitation. The courtroom buzzed with whispered comments at this measured response from their normally hard-line sheriff. Judge Wilson raised his hand for silence, his expression thoughtful as he considered all he had heard. Daniel Blackwell, he finally pronounced, this court finds you guilty of accessory to bank robbery and kidnapping. However, in light of your voluntary surrender, your cooperation with the authorities, and the testimony regarding your protection of Miss Reed, I am sentencing you to 10 years in the territorial prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years upon demonstration of good behavior and genuine rehabilitation. A murmur ran through the courtroom. The sentence was severe, as befitted the crimes, but not as harsh as many had expected. Danny himself looked stunned, as if he had anticipated much worse. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll use that time to become someone better, I promise." As the bailiff led Danny away to await transfer to the territorial prison, Hunter caught Nora's eye across the courtroom. She gave him a small, grateful smile, acknowledging his role in ensuring that Danny's full story was heard. Hunter nodded in return, feeling that justice, however imperfect, had been served. The hearing concluded, and the townspeople began to file out, already discussing the proceedings and speculating on whether the remaining Blackwell brothers would ever be caught. Hunter made his way to where Nora stood, surrounded by well-wishers commending her courage in testifying. "That was well done," he said when the others had moved away. "Your testimony made a difference." "As did yours," she replied. 10 years is still a long time, but not a lifetime. He'll have a chance to start over. That's more than many get, Hunter pointed out, and more than his brothers are likely to receive when they are finally captured. They walked together out of the courthouse into the bright midday sunshine, both lost in thought about the morning's events. Without discussing it, they turned toward the small park at the edge of town, a quiet place where they might talk without the constant scrutiny of passing townspeople. "You think the other Blackwells will be caught?" Nora asked as they settled on a bench beneath a large cottonwood tree. Hunter considered the question. Eventually, men like that make enemies, get careless, and every lawman in 3 territories is looking for them now. He glanced at her profile, noting the furrow of concern between her brows. "You don't need to worry about them coming back for you if that's what's troubling you." Nora shook her head. "It's not that. I was just thinking about Danny growing up with brothers like that. What chance did he really have to become something different?" "More chance than he took, until it was almost too late," Hunter replied. "We all face choices, Nora, regardless of our upbringing. Danny made the wrong ones for years before he finally chose to do right by you." "I suppose that's true," she acknowledged. "Though I can't help but wonder what might have happened if someone had shown him another path earlier in life." Hunter smiled at her persistent compassion. "You'd have made a good missionary with that belief in redemption." Nora laughed, the sound lightening the mood between them. "I considered it briefly, actually, but I decided I could do more good teaching children to read and think for themselves than trying to convert people to a specific faith." "A wise choice," Hunter agreed. "San Andreas is certainly better for it." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching a pair of squirrels chase each other up the trunk of a nearby pine. The events of the past 2 weeks, the kidnapping, the rescue, Danny's surrender and sentencing had created a bond between them that went beyond their previous casual acquaintance. But now that the immediate crisis was over, Hunter found himself uncertain about how to move forward. As if sensing his thoughts, Nora turned to him, her expression suddenly serious. "Hunter, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." "What's that?" he replied, wondering at the subtle shift in her tone. "That night at Martha's cabin, you said you came after me because I'm me. What did you mean by that exactly?" The directness of the question caught Hunter off guard. He'd hoped for more time to sort through his feelings, to find the right words. But Nora was looking at him expectantly, and he knew he owed her honesty. "I meant," he began carefully, "that while I would have pursued any citizen of my town who'd been taken by outlaws, my reasons for coming after you went beyond duty." He met her gaze steadily. "I've admired you since you first arrived in San Andreas, your courage in coming west alone, your dedication to your students, the way you stood up to Mrs. Holcomb's crowd when they tried to dictate who you could teach." Nora's eyes widened slightly, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "When the Blackwells took you, I realized that the thought of never seeing you again, never having the chance to know you better, was unbearable." Hunter's voice had dropped to little more than a murmur, but in the quiet of the park, Nora heard every word. "So I followed, not just because it was my job, but because I couldn't imagine San Andreas or my life without you in it." "There," it was said. Not as eloquently as he might have wished, but honestly. Hunter waited, his heart beating uncomfortably fast as Nora absorbed his words. For a moment, she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then a slow smile spread across her face, warming her eyes and making Hunter's breath catch. "I thought perhaps that was what you meant," she said softly. "I hoped it was." "You hoped?" Hunter repeated, not quite daring to believe what she was implying. Nora reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and surprisingly strong as they curled around his. "Hunter Lockhart, in the short time I've known you, I've seen your courage, your integrity, your dedication to doing what's right even when it's difficult. During those days with the Blackwells, it was the thought of you that gave me hope, the certainty that if anyone could find me, it would be you." She paused, her thumb tracing small circles on the back of his hand, sending ripples of awareness up his arm. "And then you did find me, and during our journey home, I came to know the man behind the sheriff's badge. The man who would ride for days without rest to save someone he barely knew, who would show compassion to a young outlaw despite his crimes, who would hold me through the night and make me feel safer than I've ever felt before." Hunter could hardly believe what he was hearing. He'd been so focused on his own growing feelings for Nora that he hadn't dared hope she might be developing similar feelings for him. "Nora," he began, but she shook her head, silently asking him to let her finish. "I came west looking for a new beginning, a place where I could define myself on my own terms," she continued. "I found that in San Andreas, but I found something else too, something I wasn't looking for but now can't imagine living without." Her eyes, so direct and honest, held his. "I found you, Hunter, and if you're willing, I'd like to see where this path between us might lead." For a man usually comfortable with words, Hunter found himself momentarily speechless. Instead of trying to formulate a reply, he acted on instinct, raising his free hand to gently cup Nora's cheek. When she leaned into his touch, her eyes softening with invitation, he closed the distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was both tender and searching. Nora responded immediately, her hand rising to rest against his chest, over his heart. The kiss deepened, expressing all that words had failed to capture: the fear they had overcome, the trust they had built, the connection that had grown between them through shared danger and quiet moments of understanding. When they finally drew apart, Hunter kept his hand at Nora's cheek, unwilling to break contact completely. "I think," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "that path could lead somewhere very good indeed." Nora's smile was radiant, lighting her entire face. Then let's follow it together and see." Hunter was about to kiss her again when the sound of approaching footsteps reminded him that they were in a public park, however secluded their bench might seem. Reluctantly, he lowered his hand, though he kept hold of Nora's hand as they turned to see who was approaching. It was Mrs. Holcomb, accompanied by the mayor's wife. The two women stopped short at the sight of the sheriff and schoolteacher sitting close together, holding hands. "Sheriff Lockhart, Miss Reed," Mrs. Holcomb exclaimed, her tone suggesting she'd caught them in some scandalous act rather than simply sitting together. "We were just discussing the hearing. Such a distressing business." Hunter rose, automatically helping Nora to her feet beside him. "Mrs. Holcomb, Mrs. Patterson," he greeted them, not releasing Nora's hand despite Mrs. Holcomb's pointed glance at their joined fingers. "Yes, it was a difficult morning, but justice was served." "Indeed," Mrs. Patterson agreed, her eyes darting curiously between Hunter and Nora. "Miss Reed, your testimony was most compelling." "Thank you," Nora replied calmly. "I simply told the truth as I experienced it." Mrs. Holcomb cleared her throat. "Well, we were on our way to visit Mrs. Davis. Her new baby arrived last night, a healthy boy. Would you care to join us, Miss Reed? It would do the young mother good to see you, I'm sure." It was a transparent attempt to separate Nora from Hunter, and from the slight tightening of Nora's fingers around his, she was well aware of it, but her response was gracious. "Another time, perhaps," she said with a polite smile. "Sheriff Lockhart and I have matters to discuss regarding the remaining Blackwell brothers. Public safety concerns. You understand." Hunter managed to keep his expression appropriately serious, though inwardly he was amused by Nora's quick thinking. "That's right, ladies. Official business, I'm afraid." Mrs. Holcomb looked unconvinced, but Mrs. Patterson nodded, taking her companion's arm. Of course. We'll leave you to it then. Give our best to Mrs. Davis," she added to Nora. "I'm sure the students will be excited to hear about their new little neighbor." As the two women moved away, Hunter heard Mrs. Holcomb murmuring something about propriety and setting an example, but he paid it no mind. Instead, he turned back to Nora, who was watching him with a mixture of amusement and defiance. "Official business, is it?" he teased. "Well, I didn't lie," Nora replied innocently. "We do have matters to discuss, though perhaps not exactly about the Blackwell brothers." Hunter chuckled, drawing her hand through the crook of his arm as they began walking toward the edge of the park. "Mrs. Holcomb is going to have a great deal to say about this development." "Let her," Nora said with unexpected firmness. "I didn't come west to live by Mrs. Holcomb's rules. Besides," she added with a sidelong glance at him, "I suspect she'll be less vocal about her disapproval once she realizes I'm being courted by the town sheriff." "Courted, am I?" Hunter asked, his heart lifting at the word and all it implied. Nora stopped walking, turning to face him with a small, mischievous smile that he was quickly coming to adore. "Aren't you?" Hunter looked down at this remarkable woman who had ridden into his life on a stagecoach and proceeded to transform it completely. "Yes," he said simply. "I believe I am." The weeks that followed saw a gradual, public courtship that gave the town gossips plenty to discuss, but little to truly object to. Hunter called on Nora at her home, escorted her to church services and town functions, and was a frequent visitor to the schoolhouse after hours. For her part, Nora made it clear through her manner and occasional direct statements that the sheriff's attentions were entirely welcome. Summer turned to fall, bringing crisp days and cool nights to the mountains around San Andreas. The search for the remaining Blackwell brothers continued, but reports placed them far to the south, apparently heading for the Mexican border. Life in town settled back into its normal rhythms, with one significant difference. The sheriff and the schoolteacher were now acknowledged as a couple, their courtship progressing with a steadiness that reflected both their characters. It was on a clear October evening, with the aspen trees glowing gold in the sunset, that Hunter asked Nora to ride with him up to the viewpoint overlooking the town. They had visited the spot several times before. It was one of Nora's favorite places, offering a panoramic view of San Andreas and the surrounding valley. Thunder carried them both easily now, accustomed to the double burden. Nora sat before Hunter in the saddle, leaning comfortably against his chest as they rode. They had long since abandoned the pretense of formality when alone together, though in public they maintained the propriety expected of a sheriff and schoolteacher. As they reached the viewpoint, Hunter helped Nora dismount, then secured Thunder to a nearby tree where the horse could graze on the still green grass. They walked hand in hand to the edge of the overlook, where a natural stone shelf provided a perfect seat. The town below was just beginning to light its evening lamps, golden pinpricks against the deepening blue of twilight. The mountains beyond were silhouetted against the last crimson streaks of sunset, the peaks already dusted with the first snow of the season. "It's beautiful," Nora said, her breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. "I never tire of this view." Hunter nodded, though his attention was more on her profile than on the landscape. The past months had only deepened his feelings for Nora, revealing new facets of her character. That he admired her patience with struggling students, her quiet generosity toward those in need, her unwavering moral compass that somehow managed to be both principled and compassionate. He had come to love her simply and completely, and tonight he intended to tell her so. "Nora," he began, turning toward her, "there's something I want to ask you." She looked up at him, her eyes catching the last light of day. "Yes." Hunter took both her hands in his, suddenly feeling as nervous as a schoolboy despite all they had been through together. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. Getting to know you, spending time with you, it's changed me, changed how I see my future." Nora's expression softened, her fingers tightening around his. "It's changed me too, Hunter." "I love you," he said simply, the words he'd held back for so long finally finding voice. "I love your courage and your kindness, your stubbornness and your smile. I love the way you see the good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "And I want to spend the rest of my life loving you if you'll let me." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a simple gold ring set with a single pearl, elegant but not ostentatious, much like the woman it was intended for. "Nora Reed," he said, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. "Will you marry me?" For a moment, Nora simply stared at the ring, her eyes wide. Then they lifted to his face, filled with such joy that Hunter knew her answer before she spoke. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly. "Yes, Hunter Lockhart, I will marry you." Hunter slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with the significance of the moment. It fit perfectly, the pearl gleaming softly in the fading light. When he looked up, Nora was watching him with such love in her eyes that it nearly took his breath away. "I love you," she said, reaching up to touch his face. "More than I ever thought possible." Hunter pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he felt. Nora responded in kind, her arms wrapping around his neck as they sealed their commitment to each other beneath the vast Montana sky. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Hunter rested his forehead against hers. "When?" he asked simply. Nora smiled, her hands still linked behind his neck. "Christmas," she suggested. "The school will be on holiday and it would give us time to prepare." Hunter nodded, already imagining Nora as his wife, sharing his home, his name, his life. Christmas it is, though it will be the longest 2 months of my life. Nora laughed, the sound clear and happy in the quiet evening air. Mine too, but worth the wait, I think. They stayed at the viewpoint until the stars emerged, planning their future together with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from having already faced danger and uncertainty side by side. When the night air grew too cold for comfort, they reluctantly mounted Thunder and headed back down the trail toward town. News of their engagement spread quickly through San Andreas, met with general approval and only a few sniffs of disapproval from Mrs. Holcomb's circle, who felt that perhaps the courtship had been somewhat rushed. But even they couldn't maintain their objections in the face of the obvious devotion between the sheriff and the schoolteacher. The weeks leading up to Christmas were busy ones. Hunter began renovating his small house at the edge of town, adding a second bedroom that could eventually serve as a nursery and improving the kitchen that had previously seen little use given his bachelor habits. Nora continued teaching, but spent her evenings helping with the renovations or working on the simple wedding dress. She was creating with the assistance of Mrs. Patterson, who had become an unexpected ally. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold, the mountains around San Andreas glistening with fresh snow under a brilliant blue sky. The small church was decorated with pine boughs and red berries, its austere interior softened by candlelight and the festive atmosphere of both Christmas and a wedding celebration. Hunter stood at the altar, dressed in his best suit, watching as Nora walked toward him on the arm of Mayor Patterson, who had offered to give her away in the absence of her father. She wore a dress of ivory silk, simple in design but elegant in its draping, with her chestnut hair arranged in a crown of braids interwoven with small white flowers. To Hunter, she had never looked more beautiful. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, their vows spoken with clear voices that carried to the back of the packed church. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Hunter kissed his bride with a restrained passion that nevertheless brought a few knowing smiles from the older couples present. The celebration afterward was held at the town hall, transformed by the women of San Andreas into a festive venue with tables laden with food and a small area cleared for dancing. Even Mrs. Holcomb unbent enough to wish them well, though she couldn't resist adding that she expected Mrs. Lockhart to maintain the high standards she had set as Miss Reed. "Of course, Mrs. Holcomb," Nora replied with perfect composure, though Hunter caught the twinkle in her eye. "Though I suspect my students will find it quite confusing to adjust to my new name." As the evening progressed, Hunter found a moment to draw his bride aside, into a quiet corner away from the well-wishers and celebrants. "Happy, Mrs. Lockhart?" he asked, still marveling at the reality of Nora as his wife. "Completely," she assured him, leaning into him as his arm circled her waist. "Though I'll be even happier when we can slip away and begin our life together properly." Hunter's pulse quickened at the promise in her eyes. "Another hour or so," he murmured, "then we can make our escape." True to his word, they managed to leave the celebration as it was winding down, accepting final congratulations before stepping out into the cold December night. Fresh snow had begun to fall, dusting Nora's hair and shoulders with delicate flakes as they walked the short distance to their home. At the doorway, Hunter surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained as she laughed in delight, "and one I'm happy to honor." He carried her across the threshold into their home, no longer just his house, but theirs, warmed by the fire he'd lit earlier and filled with the small touches Nora had added over the past weeks that made it truly a home. Setting her gently on her feet, Hunter closed the door against the cold and turned to his wife, still hardly believing that this remarkable woman had chosen to share her life with him. "Welcome home, Nora Lockhart," he said softly. Nora's eyes shone in the firelight as she stepped into his arms. "I am home," she replied. "Wherever you are, that's my home now." Their kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion they had restrained during their courtship. Hunter's hands moved to the small buttons at the back of Nora's dress, hesitating as he sought confirmation in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. "I've waited too long for this night to waste another moment." What followed was a discovery of each other that was both sacred and profoundly human, tender, passionate, occasionally awkward, but always filled with the deep love that had brought them to this moment. And afterward, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Nora's head pillowed on Hunter's chest, his arms holding her close, they spoke of the future they would build together. "I never expected this," Hunter admitted, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "When I rode out after the Blackwells, I was just doing my job. I never imagined I'd come home with my heart completely claimed." Nora raised her head to look at him, her hair falling in a curtain around them. "And I never imagined that being kidnapped would lead to the greatest happiness of my life," she said with a smile. "Though I wouldn't recommend it as a way to find a husband." Hunter laughed, pulling her down for another kiss. "No, I think once was enough for both of us. From now on, let's find our adventures together, in somewhat less dangerous ways." "Agreed," Nora murmured, settling back against him. "Though with you as the sheriff and me teaching 28 children of varying ages and temperaments, I suspect our life won't lack for excitement." Hunter couldn't argue with that. San Andreas was growing, the silver mine expanding operations, new settlers arriving regularly. His job would never be dull. And Nora, with her progressive ideas about education and her willingness to stand up for what she believed in, would certainly keep life interesting. But whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. That certainty was as comforting as the weight of Nora in his arms, as real as the gold band on his finger that matched the one he'd placed on hers just hours before. "Rest now," he whispered, feeling her breathing slow as she drifted toward sleep. "I've got you. Always," she murmured drowsily. "Always," he promised, closing his own eyes as contentment washed over him. "For as long as we both shall live." And as snow continued to fall outside their window, blanketing San Andreas in quiet white, Hunter Lockhart, sheriff, husband, no longer a solitary figure, followed his bride into dreams, his heart finally at peace, at rest in the arms of the woman he loved.